Back in the 70s, Deep Purple went through many lineup changes. One of the biggest changes was back in 1974 because the band had just released two successful albums with Machine Head and Made in Japan. They followed it up with Who Do We Think We Are? So by that time, they really needed a break. That led to Ian Gillan leaving the band in 1973, right after their second tour of Japan. Then after that, Ritchie Blackmore fired Roger Glover. So the band had two open spots, and they found a new singer named David Coverdale, and they got Glenn Hughes, who was previously in the band Trapeze. This was the birth of the Mark III lineup, and in the early months of 1974, they released one of their best albums of all time, which was Burn, but the addition of the two members meant that there were some new ideas coming to the band. So the album Burn saw a slight shift in their sound. The album still had their signature hard rock and blues sound, but they also added a funk rock element to their sound. Now it's time to record a follow-up to Burn, and that's the album which is the subject matter of today's video, which is Stormbringer, the second album with the Mark III lineup, or their 9th studio album, released on November 8th, 1974, now celebrating 50 years. But this was the album that caused Ritchie Blackmore to quit the band. So in this video, we'll be talking about the songs, as well as some other fun facts, and I'll talk about what made Ritchie Blackmore quit the band and what did he do afterwards. Stormbringer is an interesting album. I don't think it's as strong as Burn, but has some pretty decent tracks on it. One thing that's interesting with this album is that the album cover was used by a few different artists. It's based on a photograph of a tornado near the town of Jasper, Minnesota. The photograph was also used for the Miles Davis album Bitches Brew back in 1970, and later on in 1986 with Susie and the Banshees and their album cover Tinderbox. The name Stormbringer is the name of the second Elric Mellenboe novel, which is by Michael Moorcock, and that's the name of the magical sword described in many of his novels and comics. And I spoke about that author in my video when I did the album for Perfect Strangers. I also mentioned Michael Moorcock wrote songs with the band Blue Oyster Cult, and they had this connection, and I explained that in my other video. The album has 9 songs. It's 36 minutes long. David Coverdale sings lead on all tracks except one called Holy Man, which has Glenn Hughes on vocals. Ritchie Blackmore played guitar, John Lord is on keyboards, and Ian Pace is on drums. The album was produced by Martin Birch and Deep Purple, and I believe this was the first time Martin Birch was co-producer, as he was engineer and or mixer on the previous 7 albums. I may be wrong. If I'm wrong, you can correct me. There were also 3 singles released, which were You Can't Do It Right, Lady Double Dealer, and Stormbringer. And there was another song that was never released as a single, but it stood the test of time. I personally feel it's the best song on the album. It was also covered by a well-known Swedish progressive metal band, and I'll get to that later on. This was an album I was not very familiar with, not like Burn or Made in Japan, and I have both of those albums here on vinyl, but I listened to Stormbringer via streaming, and I listened to the deluxe version, which was about like an hour and a half long. So I basically listened to the entire album about like 3 times in a row. And I thought it was a solid album, although much different than many of the albums before it. I think this album here, Burn, had a nice blend of the old hard rock sound with a little bit of that funky sound, giving it like a fresh sound with the 2 new members. But with Stormbringer, I felt they took the funkiness to another level. And I think I maybe liked it a little less than Burn. But I also thought Ritchie Blackmore didn't have his classic guitar riffs that I'm used to hearing. He did on some songs, which I'll talk about later, but I think that's probably one of the reasons why he decided to leave after this album. And I will say that Ritchie Blackmore had some really good solos on the album, so that was still there. John Lord had some cool keyboard playing, but he used a different style with his playing. It sounded a lot funkier. And Glenn Hughes' bass sound could be heard up front in the mix throughout most of the songs. This had mostly David Coverdale doing vocals. Glenn Hughes only had lead vocals on the 1 track Holy Man, as well as backing vocals on a few tracks. So in general, I thought the album had a sound that was very 70s sounding. There was a lot of funk and soul on the album, in addition to the hard rock sound. As for the songs, side A had 4 songs, which were Stormbringer, Love Don't Mean a Thing, Holy Man, and Hold On. So here's some trivia with the title track, Stormbringer. According to Glenn Hughes, the slurred gibberish that is spoken by Coverdale at the beginning of the title track, just prior to the first verse, is the same backwards dialogue that Linda Blair's character utters in the film The Exorcist, when she is questioned by the priest. One of the standouts on side A is Holy Man. According to David Coverdale, he said, while the lyrics are surreal, they reference Glenn Hughes' life, such as his girlfriend at the time, Vicky Gibbs, as Madonna, and referencing Glenn's substance abuse. But out of all the songs on side A, the best song was Stormbringer, because I felt this one had the best Ritchie Blackmore guitar riffs, and John Lord sounded like he was playing in the style he usually does. Sounds like the kind of song that would have fit on the Burn album. I thought Love Don't Mean a Thing was decent, but it sounded more like Whitesnake than Deep Purple. But I liked John Lord's playing on this one, even though it was a little funky. Holy Man was a good song, although I felt it had a bit of a country vibe and sounded kind of like a Uriah Heep type of song. And the last track, Hold On, was a pretty cool, underrated deep cut, although I thought it was a departure from their signature sound. Side 2 had 5 tracks. Let me talk about the first 4, then I'll speak about the last one, because the last one deserves special attention. This one had one single called Lady Double Dealer, and then had a few deep cuts. You Can't Do It Right with The One You Love, Highball Shooter, and The Gypsy. Lady Double Dealer was probably the most classic Deep Purple sounding song on this side. It had a much faster pace with a lot of those signature Ritchie Blackmore style guitar riffs. The song also had more of a guitar-centric sound. You Can't Do It Right had some of those funky guitar riffs, but also had John Lord playing some funky keyboards, as well as Ritchie Blackmore playing some of that funk rock as opposed to the normal hard rock style. Highball Shooter had some cool Ritchie Blackmore style riffs, had that classic Deep Purple sound, but I also thought this went into more of a blues direction. And the song The Gypsy was a pretty cool track, and it had more of a classic Deep Purple vibe. I think maybe like an older type of sound. But what I feel is the best song on the album is the last song, Soldier of Fortune. This was never released as a single. It never charted, as far as I know, and I might be wrong, but this song has stood the test of time. It was one of the best tracks in the album. It's a fan favorite, and it's a soft ballad, but it's a very memorable song, and probably could have been a big hit if it was released as a single. This has some of Ritchie Blackmore's best playing, and you could even consider it his last song with Deep Purple until Perfect Strangers in 1984. The song has also been covered by the band Opeth, and the Opeth version sounds a lot like the original Soldier of Fortune, and that is a bonus track on the Ghost Reveries album. So if you have the deluxe version, I actually have this CD here of Ghost Reveries, and this one has the Soldier of Fortune. It's the longer version, or the remix, or reissue, or something like that. So after this album, guitarist Ritchie Blackmore left after the subsequent tour. He stated that he didn't like the funky direction the band was taking, but according to Glenn Hughes, he said, "People who listen to Stormbringer, please listen. Ritchie Blackmore is damn funky. Whether he likes it or not, he played wonderfully on the album." And Ritchie Blackmore officially left the band on June 21st, 1975, to form his own band with Ronnie James Dio. And Ronnie was actually in the band Elf, and he took, I think, a few other members from that band, and he called it Ritchie Blackmore's Rainbow, and then he shortened it to Rainbow after the first album. But that's another story. I'll probably do another video on that eventually at some time. But that's all. Let me know your thoughts on the album Stormbringer. Is it one of your favorites? How does it compare to the other Mark III album, Burn? Let me know in the comments. Please check out my review of Burn, and you can hear about how the Mark III lineup came about. And in the meantime, thanks for watching. Please give this video a like. It helps me with the YouTube algorithm. Please subscribe if you're not already. I do rock and metal reviews, rankings, and more. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.